Dr. Thubten Jingpa, who is a scholar, a former Buddhist monk, and a longtime English translator for the Dalai Lama, tells of a problem he has encountered. It came about when he was leading U.S. American students in the metta meditation. Metta means loving kindness, and you may be familiar with this meditation. Usually the first stage is to say aloud or to oneself, "May I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free." And then there are 3 further stages where we think of somebody we know and love, a friend or a family member, or we may just say, may those I love be happy and peaceful and free. And then we stretch a little more and we think of people we find difficult, people who we may regard as opponents or even enemies. And we wish our loving kindness on them. May they be happy and peaceful and free. And then finally, we expand it to all beings. That's the usual order. That was how Dr. Jingpa introduced it. But students had a really hard time with one part. The first part. They had a really hard time imagining themselves and pouring out loving kindness to themselves so that they could be happy and peaceful and free. Well, he's a good teacher. Eventually, he changed the order to put this harder part later. But it had a profound effect on how he thought about something to which he's devoted a lot of work here in this country: self-compassion. The Dalai Lama had a similar encounter. Meeting with Western psychotherapists, they wanted to know how Buddhist philosophy could help them in their practices, and they asked him particularly for his wisdom on one of their hardest challenges: the deep self-loathing of many of their clients. As Jingpa relates the story, at first, the Dalai Lama was baffled. He goes on to say, if self-preservation, self-care, and self-love are fundamental instincts of every sentient creature, as Buddhist psychology assumes, how could we hate our very being? How could we become so unhinged and alienated from our own nature? He says, the Dalai Lama now understands that self-hatred comes from caring a lot, but being unable to accept or forgive our imperfect selves. And although he first encountered the therapist's stark description in the global West, research has made it evident that the problem is not limited to U.S. Americans or any one part of the human population, including places that have been deeply saturated with Buddhism. But we here do struggle with it quite a bit. It seems that more than many cultures, ours really leaves us with the need for that affirmation. How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? Last week, we talked about a sense of belonging that goes with you everywhere so that anywhere can be home. If the voice that comes with us wherever we go is harsh and punishing, how can any place feel like home, safe and nurturing? So clearly, self-compassion can be difficult. To our ears, maybe particularly U.S. American ears, the term may seem self-absorbed, even selfish, or just nonsensical. Compassion is a feeling between people, right? So if it's a quality of relationship, how can we have it for ourselves? Well, we're capable of judging ourselves. and liking ourselves or disliking ourselves, being ashamed of ourselves, being proud of ourselves. So we do have a relationship with ourselves. That opens up the possibility that we can have compassion for ourselves or lack it. Even so, this concept is easily mixed up with other things. So let's take a look at some things it is and isn't. Kristin Neff, Dr. Kristin Neff, has made the study of self-compassion her central focus. And if you want to learn a lot more and even take a test about how much self-compassion you practice, you can do that at her website, self-compassion.org. I should have given that to Gage to put up there, but self-compassion with a hyphen.org. She sees from her studies that there are really three elements that together make up self-compassion. One is self-kindness. Think of how you would like to respond to a dear friend when they have made a mistake, or they are suffering, or they feel inadequate. Treating yourself the same way that you wish to treat them is the self-kindness aspect of self-compassion. That stands in contrast to self-judgment. That you hope, you try, not to meet a friend's suffering with, oh, come on, buck up already, stop whining. And yet we direct that kind of voice to ourselves. The second element is common humanity. She says when we struggle or make mistakes, there's often an irrational but pervasive sense of isolation, as if I were the only person in the world having this painful experience. All humans suffer, however, not the same way or the same amount, but the very definition of being human means being vulnerable, flawed, and imperfect. So Dr. Neff notes that when we are self-compassionate, we recognize that our suffering connects us rather than separates us from others. So this element, common humanity, stands in contrast to isolation. And the third element is mindfulness. Dr. Neff says mindfulness allows us to turn toward our pain with acceptance of the present moment's reality. Of course, when we're suffering, whether it's just pain has been visited upon us or we've done something that we think is stupid or bad, and so it's very hard to feel that kindness for ourselves. It's hard to notice at that moment. We want to look away. But when we are mindful, she says, the difficult thoughts and feelings we realize aren't permanent. They aren't everything. They're the reality of this moment. And noticing them as they come and go helps us to be less reactive. So mindfulness stands in contrast to over-identification, to saying, oh my God, this is everything, and it's how I'm always going to feel, how I'm going to be. Three elements: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. There are a lot of myths that come up. And she's discovered them all and done research about them. How do they stand up? These myths about self-compassion. One reason that we may turn away from it, think, oh, I shouldn't be doing that kind of thing, is we think it means letting ourselves off the hook. We won't be taking responsibility for our mistakes, for our harmful actions. But on the contrary, self-compassion provides the sense of safety that's needed to acknowledge what we've done. And research shows, because Dr. Neff has conducted it, that people who are self-compassionate about their past mistakes Instead of saying, oh, you stupid person, you always do this kind of thing, saying, you made a mistake. It happens. They are more likely to take personal responsibility for their misdeeds and try to repair their situation. There's a myth that self-compassion is just feeling sorry for ourselves, wallowing in self-pity. But on the contrary, Neff and Jingpa, who you will not be surprised to hear, Buddhist teachers are a great influence upon this scholar, say, self-pity is that why me thinking. It's very self-focused, but self-compassion frames the experience of being imperfect in light of the shared human experience. And research shows that self-compassion reduces self-focus, helps us feel more connected to others when we struggle. It helps increase our sense of perspective. Likewise, it does not make us more self-indulgent. It does not make us more selfish. Another myth is that it's the same as self-esteem. Well, self-esteem has its place, judging oneself positively, having high self-esteem. It's strange, isn't it, that in this culture that's so focused on our self-esteem, how important it is for children as they grow, for adults as they enter into the life of work and relationships to have self-esteem, struggle so much with self-compassion. Well, it's because they're not the same thing at all. Typically, to have self-esteem, we need to feel special. The Lake Wobegon effect. We're all above average. And so we do fine when we're succeeding, but when we fail, our self-esteem tends to come crashing down. Neff's research shows that compared to self-esteem, self-compassion is not very associated with comparisons to others. It's less contingent on our appearance, our social approval, our successful performance, and so it provides a more stable sense of self-worth over time than self-esteem. And finally, there's that concern, a pervasive myth, that self-compassion will make us soft or weak. We need to be harsh with ourselves, give a little tough love. Dr. Neff says, when you go into battle, if you see life can be a battle, I need to be tough. She says, when you go into that battle, what's going to make you stronger? An ally who has your back or an enemy who cuts you down? Which one are you going to be to yourself? Which voice do you want to carry with you? That ally or an enemy? And sure enough, research shows that self-compassionate people are better able to deal with stressful situations. Natural disasters, military combat, health challenges, you name it. Doesn't seem to make us weak at all. It makes us strong. Our theme this month is cultivating compassion. If we're to cultivate compassion for people like Aaron and the others who were at those breakfasts that concerned Mark, the volunteers, do we need to have self-compassion? Jingpa says no, and. Some say that without self-compassion, we can't be compassionate towards others. I disagree, he says. Compassion for others, especially for those in need, is a natural human instinct. Spoken like somebody who was trained for years as a Buddhist monk, yes? And he goes on to say that developing self-compassion makes us more able to access and act upon our compassion for others. It helps us renew our resources, protecting ourselves against burnout and pessimism and despair. It helps us to set realistic goals. Because, when you feel like you need to prove yourself worthy even to exist, when you've got this nasty, hectoring voice telling you how you've fallen short, you tend to set unrealistic goals for yourself, namely perfection. Self-compassion helps us to learn from our experience. What helps you learn better? Think about something you've tried to learn recently. Is it helpful to have a coach or a teacher or a companion who responds to your mistakes with, "You are so stupid, you'll never learn this"? Or, "I can see how hard you're trying. That's great. In fact, I can see your improvement. I think here's where you went wrong. You want to try fixing that part and having another go?" Which voice do you want accompanying you? And because we do have these multiple voices, ourselves talking to ourselves, how's that going? Self-compassion also helps us to feel less alone. We're more connected to others. And of course, that goes both ways. If I realize that I am like you, that I am in need of compassion, and you are in need of compassion, it also means you're like me. And I can notice when you need something. In fact, one of the phrases Jingpa teaches in his compassion training, right here in our area at Stanford, is "just like me." That when we have a conflict, when we find it difficult to be compassionate to somebody, we try to remember they, like all of us, just want to be loved and happy under their prickliness, under their cruelty even, their injustice. Everybody wants to be loved and happy. I do, you do, the most difficult person you can think of does. Just like me. Just like me. And that, of course, turns us right back to, I need to be loved and happy. That's what I want. Can I have compassion for that person? That soft little being that might be protected by armor wants to be loved and happy. When we do the 4-part meta-meditation, as I said, the 3rd part is usually to imagine a difficult person, someone for whom it's particularly challenging for us personally to summon up compassion. Well, as Jingpo writes, often we are our own difficult person. A barrier toward feeling compassion for another person is when we have bad feelings between us, right? We resent them, we've had a bad history. Well, he reminds us the same is true of ourselves. We can develop self-compassion when we recognize we're only human. We're doing the best we can. We did the best we could at that moment. And as Dr. Neff says, this doesn't mean we don't try to improve ourselves. It doesn't mean we don't try to challenge ourselves. It doesn't mean we think we're perfect the way we are. Not at all. It's a very practical, psychological technology for improving. Because again, we can say, okay, I did the best I could. It's a difference between saying, why do you always do this? And asking with real curiosity, why did you do that this time? I'll give you a small example. I arrived this morning to discover I did not have my keys. I thought I didn't have my keys. Maybe they were in one of my many, many pockets in my bags. I don't know. I didn't know at the time. I knew once I came in and checked, Carlos let me into my office, and I checked my mailbox, and there were my keys. So now I know where I left them. Anyway, that's a place where my mind would usually go to. Why do you always do this? Because I do it a lot. But, I'd been steeped in self-compassion all week. So I was pretty good this time, caught myself. And remembered, instead of, why do you always do this? You could ask, like a good coach, right? Why did you do this time? Why'd you leave your keys? Did you put them down here somewhere? Did you put them into your desk for safekeeping? That's something you can learn from. Whereas the anger kind of shuts that down. Marshall Rosenberg, who you may know from nonviolent communication, he's the founder of that method. He says, an important aspect of self-compassion is to be able to empathetically hold both parts of ourselves, the self that regrets a past action and the self that took that action in the first place. Both. This is how we grow as people. This is how we learn. This is how we expand our hearts to hold more. The difficult along with the easy. The mistakes and harms committed along with the endearing actions, the whole mess of being human, can we hold it and know that it's human and know that only with that compassion will we ever make being human a little bit more of a loving and just and kind business. We can cultivate compassion for others while being very hard on ourselves. Helping professionals who are impatient with their families after a long day of caring for people in the ICU, say. Heroically altruistic people who beat themselves up for not doing more, for not sleeping less, for not fixing everything that's broken about the world. So that proves that compassion does not always track with self-compassion, but practicing self-compassion will absolutely help us to cultivate compassion. Practicing self-kindness so that we can be kinder to others. So we're not burnt out on our own judgment. Practicing an awareness of our common humanity so that we see our common humanity instead of thinking we're each isolated. Practicing mindfulness so that when we see somebody behaving in a way that's difficult, violent even, might put them outside a gathering for a time, we can recognize that's now. That's this moment. It doesn't have to be who they are forever. It may not be who they are half an hour from now. Making that room for compassion. And all of that practice, all that cultivation will help make the world one that radiates compassion from here on out. May it be so. May we help to make it so.